Very good evening to you. It's John here from Tutor to You, welcoming you along to this, the first of our live streams for OCR A-Level Law, aimed at giving you some support with your revision and your preparation. And tonight we're concentrating on Paper 1. I'm joined by Laura on the right-hand side of the screen, and I've got Robina in the middle. Now, we've been having one or two little technical problems tonight. Laura, can you hear us? Lauren, Robina, you can hear us, can't you?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
We've lost Laura for a little while. We'll get Laura back, but what I think we'll do is we'll get cracking with a little bit of a presentation, which Robina's going to drive, and then we'll answer a few questions. Is that right, Robina? Shall we get cracking with that?
Yeah, let's crack on. Thank you for the comments in the chat already, guys. I can see there's a bit of discussion about all three papers. This one is focused more on paper 1 this evening, but we have got the other sessions on paper 2 and paper 3. So if you watch out on the live streams, you'll be able to get into your phones when they are. So just a little bit of a recap. Some questions that have popped up previously. Do I have to answer all the questions on the exam paper? So I'm hoping that we are aware that we don't answer every single question. So you've got your section A, which is your legal system, your English legal system. You choose one of the 2 8-mark knowledge questions and one of the 2 AO3 evaluation questions, and you don't have to answer sort of the same topic areas if they are, but you choose one from each. And then for the criminal law, the big bulk of the paper, 75% of the marks, you choose an entire side. There's always students that don't follow that, and they try to do sort of a scenario from each side, and it really does hinder the grades. So yeah, if you do all of one side for us, you'll do 2 scenarios that are 20 marks each, and you'll do an essay question that's 20 marks as well. So that's where your sort of full 2 hours is coming from. An hour and a half on section B, the criminal side, and your 30 minutes on section A. So just a little bit of a recap there. A few students have asked us about the sort of timings that we should be using. Again, these are a bit loose. It depends on sort of your structure, but we'd say on average, again, we should be spending 30 minutes on section A, and then your sort of your hour and a half on your section B. There's a little bit of reading time there as well. You'll have done a lot of practice questions in lessons, as I can imagine. So as long as you stick to the sort of current timings, 30 minutes per sort of 20 mark area, that will make up your 2 hours. And we've been asked before in terms of what layout to do it. It really does not matter. If you turn over and you see the legal system and it's 2 nice questions on Friday morning and you want to get those done straight away, bag those marks, then of course do that. The criminal is worth more, so I would always advise my students to do the criminal first, because there's more marks to be gained. But I do appreciate if you've got a really nice, easy question on the left-hand side, you are going to want to tackle that first. So make a note of your timings, really. 30 minutes maximum on section A, because it's only a quarter of those marks. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Robina. And now I'm just checking that. Laura, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me now?
We can. It's a little bit like the Eurovision Song Contest, isn't it? We're all with this. Okay, guys, what do we want to carry on with the PowerPoint here, or do we want to go over to student questions? What would you like us to do?
I think there's a couple more slides right just now, so on
Sorry, Laura. Different answers.
Can't see the chat, so if Robina keeps an eye on it, and then we can answer any questions from there.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Sorry, Laura, what do you want to do?
We could show the other PowerPoint slide. So if we've gone through the structure and the timings.
Yeah, gone through the timing.
Sorry.
Brilliant. Thank you, Johnny. Yeah. Laura, do you want to take this bit for me then, and then I'll go to chat questions?
Yeah, so the evaluation question, obviously there's 2 evaluation aspects. There's, you've got your 12 marker on section A, and you're going to have a choice of those 12 markers, like Robina said. Now, you are looking for 4 well-developed points here. Now, what a well-developed point looks like is you would make a point which you introduce your evaluative content, and then you do your develop point, which is where you explain the issue with the law or the area. So you have to really give a link to the topic area, and then a well-developed. So well-developed, you can either add more additional information that's relevant to the point. You could add a case and explain how your case shows the evaluation point, or you could counter argue. So you could put a counter argument in there. There is one thing to note, that obviously you make sure that if it's like an advantages question, you're just discussing the advantages on the 12 marker. Same for disadvantages. If the question says advantages and disadvantages, you want to be discussing both of those within your well-developed points. So aim for like an even balance. So 2 advantages, 2 disadvantages. Now, evaluation is also relevant, and you can use this structure on the essay question, on the substantive, on the criminal law side. So again, that's worth 20 marks. So you need to do your 8 marks AO1 on there. So you'd have to explain the law of the area using cases and definitions of the law to explain the rules. But then you would also then need to evaluate in light of the question. So you're going to get an essay question there on one of the areas. And you would need to use this well-developed point structure as well. Again, aiming for about 4 developed points, or more, a couple like developed points as well. So you'd put your point again, say what the issue is relevant to the question, explain how the law shows that issue, how it's relevant, and then you would well develop it. And again, that could be further information. It could be a case where you say how this case shows the evaluation point, or it could be the counter argument as well. So you can put a counter argument on there. It is important on 20 markers that we obviously link back to the question as well. So you want to make sure that when you're discussing, you link back to the question. And then on the 20 markers, you do need a conclusion as well. On the 12 marker, a conclusion is not important. It's just about getting the evaluation down. Whereas on the 20 mark evaluation question, the essay, which is the same on both sides, so whichever side you get to choose from out of the criminal law side, the evaluation essay would need that conclusion that really like sums up your main evaluation points you've given, and then it would link back to the question as well. I'm not sure if you want to add anything there on Robina as well.
No, absolutely fab. Thank you. I'm just starting to go through the chat to see the questions that are starting to come up for us, which is great. Let's have a look then. So there is some other questions that came from the grade boosters. Some of you might have attended those earlier sort of in the academic year, but I'm just going to get to the chat because there's some sort of fantastic stuff coming up here, guys. So thank you. Keep them coming in. I'll take a few first, Laura, if you can get to them already. So
yeah, if you just read them out, if you take one and then read the next one out to me.
Yeah. So Maisie's asked a few in one, really. So she's asked how we structure a loss of control scenario. So if you go back to your class notes on loss of control, you've sort of got 3 key areas, looking at the fact that you need to lose control in the first place. That loss has to come from one of the qualifying triggers, the fear trigger or the anger trigger, and then whether the normal person sort of in your situation with that same degree of tolerance would do the same. So if I was doing sort of a 20-mark question on loss, I would explain that law first with the relevant cases that your teachers have taught you, and then I would apply those factors. So what is it that person has done to lose control? Did they have the fear trigger? Did they have the anger trigger? Why would that be relevant there? And whether you think the normal person would have done the exact same in that situation. So you're looking sort of 3-pronged approach. Just with loss as well, bear in mind those things that are excluded. So the examiner might pop something in there, sort of like revenge or sexual infidelity, just to sort of throw you off. Bear in mind they will allow that defence to fail. So that would be in your conclusion, that wouldn't work there. So I'm hoping that helps. Just go through the 3 things to explain and then apply. She's also asked about consent. Consent's a bit of a strange one, Maisie, because it depends what elements of consent are in the scenario. You've got a lot of categories that Brown gave us, and it's unlikely, unless you've seen Laura before, but it's unlikely to have all of the categories in one 20-mark question. I would be sort of picking on the ones that are there. So things like tattooing and branding, sexual activity, your sports, your chastisement. Just check the question, because it could be, consent on its own for 20 marks, and you've got 2 or 3 categories that would apply to the person, or it might be something like a non-fatal. You might have a battery and an ABH, and then apply a consent to one of those. I think that's the thing with the defences. They can be on their own, but equally they can be part of a crime as well. So yeah, with consent, I wouldn't talk about all of them. I would only be talking about the categories that are going to be relevant, unless consent is the 20-mark essay, in which case obviously there you do need to show your knowledge on there. And again, with intoxication is exactly the same. So if it's on its own, you might have a little bit of voluntary intoxication, you might have involuntary intoxication in there. But if it's tagged on to the end, so I've just done a practice with my students this week, a theft with some intoxication, but it was only voluntary intoxication. So I'd only expect the little bit involuntary rather than going through it all. So I think it's about reacting to the command really of the question and seeing that there. So yeah, excellent. Thank you for that one. I'll just pop one on. He's asked how many defences or offences can be in a question. So when she's obviously looked at past questions, she's seen maybe one or two. So yeah, she's asked that one.
Okay, that's a really good question, Sophie. So it depends. The offence against the person, you could have a scenario where it could just ask about offences against a person. Traditionally, we'd expect probably about 2 of them to come up together within there. The scenarios that have come up in the past tend to have 2 issues, or it could be 1 issue with 3 victims, and that would allow you to discuss the different ones. The offences and offences against the person could come up together. So like Robina said before, you could get a non-fatals question with aspects of consent. So you would go through, if say like section 47 ABH, you'd go through the actus reus and mens rea of that, and then you tackle consent separately. So I would always say make sure you tackle each one first before moving on to the next one. And then same for intoxication. You could get a scenario where discuss the non-fatal offences and intoxication. How the scenarios have come up before, the questions have sort of indicated what's in there, so they do tell you to look for offences and defences. Or they have been quite prescriptive as well. So we've had ones in the past where it said discuss self-defence and duress, and that was a 20-mark scenario together. So again, if it comes up like that where there's a mixture of defences, tackle them separately. So talk about self-defence first, then apply it, and then talk about duress second, and then apply it as well. Keeping them contained. Don't tend to switch between the two. Take them as like 2 separate ones, but they can definitely come up together. They could come up on their own as well. They really could do, like the consent and intoxication are evaluation questions, so they could be on their own. And you could have, in theory, have a question where you've got just non-fatal offences in there as well, so it could be its own separate 20 marker. I always say to my students, like, just be prepared for anything. Anything could come up together, and if you are not then going in thinking that one thing's going to come up in a certain way, you're prepared to tackle the question because you're not expecting it to be in a certain situation then.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. A few have asked about cases. Now there's no prescriptive amount in terms of your cases, and remember your statutory authority counts as well. So if you've got an area of law that's got an Act of Parliament, if you can give that Act of Parliament with the year on the end, that does count as if it's a case. It is statutory authority or cases. So a couple of you, Bob, some in the chat there, yeah, we sort of say around 4, but there isn't a prescription sort of with that. So, you know, you're not going to get marked down if you've done 4 or 3. You know, it all depends on the nature of the question. So as long as you can show a good range of cases, and it's what you do with them, you know, it's not just chucking that name in and adding it onto the end. It's using the relevant cases there to be able to back yourselves up, or areas under a statute, like your non-fatals, a lot of them are under Parliament's law, aren't they? So you can use that to back yourself up. John asked a good question about, can you get fatal and non-fatal on the same page? Yes, because remember, you get 2 20-mark scenarios and you get an essay. So you could have a scenario maybe just on murder or just on, you know, one of the manslaughters. And then the other scenario on that page could be a completely different area. So that then could be a non-fatal. Or as Laura said, you know, the essay question could be a non-fatal question. And then you've got that there. So there's no rule that areas have to be together. I know maybe on some of the previous papers, seen like a side that's more fatal and a side that's more property, but it can be absolutely anything that pops up there. Again, as Laura said, just think about the content areas that there is enough for 20 marks and on, and that's what could be there. So yes, I would definitely plan for that. Laura, Jazz has asked,
sorry,
how many paragraphs do we need?
Oh, sorry.
Go for it.
was going to say on the back of this question, like Robina said, like literally anything can come up together. It could be fatals and defences, could be the so you could have on general defences. It could be fatals and property. There is actually no prescribed way that anything could possibly come up. And you'll have seen from the past papers of this of the specification that we've got currently that it is any combination. So I really would try and stay away from thinking going into that exam on Friday that there's going to be a set side on certain things, because there really won't be. It absolutely anything could come up together.
Yeah, definitely. Especially if you look at last year's paper, you know, a full 20 marker just on mens rea, you know, which is a completely different one to throw out there. So yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah, so sorry, Laura. Jazz was asking how many paragraphs do we need for a 12 marker?
Oh, that's a question. So going back to what I said before, 12 marker is your evaluation question, and you want to be aiming for about 4 well-developed points there. So that could equate to paragraphs. But equally, you could write 5 developed points. So that's where obviously you're stating the law, and then you're explaining the rules that are there as well, or 6 developed points even. So it's not just that you have to have a set number of paragraphs, it's more looking for that you've got a good range of evaluation points there, and you are tackling the questions it says. So you are discussing just advantages or disadvantages if it says that, or just a combination, and it's having that balance of the combination as well, so advantages and disadvantages. But I would, as a rule of thumb, I'd aim for 4 well-developed points, which would equate to 4 paragraphs, which would be a good starting point.
Yeah, definitely. You don't need to conclude either, so just those 4 paragraphs would be enough for the 12 marker. You only need to conclude on your 20 mark essay because it's asked you a specific question. Brill. Olivia has popped up. So I am just going down the chat, guys, so don't worry if you've put something later, I will get there. So Olivia's asked where the students may losing marks on the scenarios. For me, it's the AO2 application. So I'm back for the exam board, and one of the issue areas is the AO2 students not actually explaining why. So going back to the question earlier, I think it was Maisie that asked about loss of control. Students just going, yeah, they've lost control, or yeah, there were a trigger. And you've really got to be explicit. You have to imagine that the person that's reading your paper has no knowledge about law. And that goes for any of the 20 mark scenarios, you know, even if it's theft, you know, why is it appropriation? For us, the application, and not concluding with the overall, you know, are they guilty, or if it's a defence, are they going to get the defence as a result? Because it's sometimes a bit too simplistic, which I understand. You're running out of time. You know, it's very difficult, isn't it, to do a 2-hour paper in 2 hours? But please, where possible, do say why. And Luna's asked, could there be a problem question solely on actus reus or strict liability? I'd say yes to both of those, because obviously we saw the mens rea one. So equally, there could be something around actus reus, you know, emissions, causation, you know, any of your elements that you can use there, like coincidence, for example. Strict liability, again, is a possibility. It has happened in previous papers, hasn't it? So I would definitely expect something a little bit different on there. I'll just dish them to you, Laura, if you don't mind. So let me just have a quick check. So it's come from Phil, who says, oh, no, sorry, he's answering a previous question to somebody. Emma, I can see that. Betty, do I need to know the names of cases, or can I just describe the facts?
So case names are important, and there won't be any marks for just describing facts, I'm afraid. It is more about knowing the case name and the law that's come from that case as well. So if we're thinking, I don't know, let's think about JCC versus Eisenhower in wounding. You would need to know the name, but then you need to know that it describes what a wound is, so the breakage of the continuity of skin. So it's about knowing that, like, that really the facts are not relevant. They're useful to help you identify like where it might be relevant in scenarios, but definitely I won't be reciting those in an exam. I will be focusing on the point of law, the principle, and the case name as well.
Yeah, definitely. It is more, as somebody said further down here, I think it was Mogul 5, it's more what that case told us. If you want to put a phrase in so the examiner knows you've got the right case, great, but it is more on what that case has showed us with that area of law, which is a key thing. Libby's asked about duress and necessity. So she wants us to go through just to what we do if it's a duress scenario or a necessity scenario.
Do you want me to take that one?
Just scrolling through if there's any more. Yeah, if you can. Sorry, I'm just seeing what else we can discuss.
Yeah. No, it's fine.
There's loads here. Thanks,
if duress
guys.
comes up, there's loads, it's fantastic. So if duress comes up, you want to be looking at the Graham test. So it's the 2-part test. You're looking at the nature of the threat to start off with. So is it a threat of death or serious injury? Is it towards somebody that is relatable to the defendant? Is there a link between what's been threatened and the crime that they've committed? Is there a safe avenue of escape? Could they have gone to the police at any point and not carried out the threat? And then you want to be looking then at the second part of the test as well. So the second part of the test is applying those characteristics. Would the reasonable person be able to avoid a threat, basically? And there's certain characteristics where people are less likely to avoid a threat, but you would be considering what that person, a reasonable person, would do in that situation. And then obviously there's to consider like the gangs and the involvement in gangs as well. So obviously if you are involved in a gang, the courts have basically said duress is going to fail because by your membership to that gang, you should have known that you would be asked to carry out threats and therefore you can't use it as a defence for a crime as well. So I would sort of follow your 2-part Graham test structure and then add in the extra bits, especially under the duress, the threat, the nature of the threat element as well.
Definitely. Lily's asked if we can go over attempts. So Lily, attempts has got sort of a 2-pronged approach, hasn't it? You've got your actus reus of an attempted crime and then you've got your mens rea of an attempted crime. So if there's any question that says attempts in it, it's the law on attempts from the Criminal Attempts Act 1981 that you should be talking about. So looking at your actus reus, the defendant has to do something that's more than merely preparatory. It's not about preparing, it's going a little bit further than that, and you'll have relevant cases that your teacher will have taught you. And then the mens rea, that we have to have the intention for that end crime. And then there's the extra relevant sections such as sort of withdrawal, your impossible crimes that might be relevant to. There has been a couple of past questions on it. So if you're not 100% sure, maybe have a look at a couple of the 20 markers. You'll notice that there's maybe sort of 3, as Laura said before, there's sort of 1 topic area, but there's 3 people to attach it to, because you've got to remember you've got 12 marks of your AO2 there, so you would be applying the 2-part test for attempts on a few occasions to decide if they are going to get that. But yeah, any question that says attempted, that's what we're looking for. Even if it says attempted theft or attempted robbery, it wants the law on attempts, it doesn't want the law on thefts, and it doesn't want the law on robbery. So it's a good question to ask because it has caused confusion for students in the past, really. I'm just scrolling down for a few others. Let's have a look. So Laura, I think it's Zena, apologies if I've got that wrong. With the evaluation essay, can you still get marks for your evaluation points even if the examiner doesn't agree with them?
Oh, that's a very good question. Yeah, you can do. There is no specific there's loads of evaluation points that are related to all of them. So you've obviously got intoxication, self-defense, consent, and the non-fatals as the main ones on this paper, and it's a very prescriptive approach. So as long as you're making a valid point and you're backing it up in your developed point and you are referring to perhaps examples, because no, there's no set way. I mean, I know when I'm teaching it myself, like I might not agree with a point, but it's still a valid point, and students, as long as they make it very well, will still get the credit for it as well.
Yeah, definitely. Olivia, no, you don't need the case dates, just the name is absolutely fine there.
No.
Maisie, yeah, you're right. Self-defense was the essay question last year. Again, it's very difficult because, as somebody said really high up in the chat, some areas have been up more than once. So we can't sort of just discard the fact that consent and self-defense were the 2 essay questions from 2019 and 2022, because there's nothing to stop your examiner sort of doing that again, bouncing that again. But yes, you've got areas like intoxication and non-fatals that haven't been done as of yet. I would just make sure you've got those areas on a piece of paper and you know exactly what things you want to say. So if intoxication is your essay question, what things are you going to say to evaluate? As Laura said, even if the examiner doesn't agree with them, if they're valid points, you will get the credit. So that's what I did with my students this week. I said, right, if it's self-defense, what things are you going to pick on? So a paragraph on reasonable force, a paragraph, on something like preemptive strike, sick or on householders. Intoxication, there might be a paragraph surrounding sort of Dutch courage or the distinction between basic and specific. If you can have the essay areas in your head and what sort of things you're going to say, you'll know walking in there on Friday then, regardless. These are specific things, and there's some things, some themes that lend themselves to all the areas. So I said to my students, when you go in there, whatever the area is, talk about sentencing, because you can use that for any of them. What you think about the fact that intoxication, isn't a defence for voluntary and basic. It can reduce it for specific. It gives full acquittal for involuntary. What do you think about the fact that consent gives you a full acquittal? What do you think about the sentencing for the non-fatal? So if you have sort of prompts like that in your head, that's definitely going to help you with the essay evaluation, because 12 marks are for the AO3, and 8 marks are for the knowledge sort of on that particular area, which, like I say, is quite a key thing there. But I'd definitely get yourselves into that sort of habit there. And even though the areas have been up as essays, as somebody's already said in the chat, and Laura said before, they can be still part of scenarios or even full scenarios. So please don't discount them just because it was on the paper. Definitely last year.
I'd try and not go into the exam trying to second guess the examiner beforehand. You need to prepare for any situation, and the more prepared you are, the better you are going to be able to tackle those questions. If you go in thinking it's going to be a certain question because it's not been up before, then it isn't. That's not going to be helpful to your exam, and that could make you worried, and that impacts there. But if you go in, like Robina says, where you've beforehand, you've prepared for all 4 of those topic areas and points that you can use, then you're in the best situation. I really wouldn't try and second guess that examiner, because we saw, like last year's paper, like Robina said earlier, we had a mens rea 20 marker, which had never been up before, but we can't predict. And I wouldn't even, I spend my time now doing like proper purposeful revision, instead of trying to work out like what's going to potentially come up on the paper.
Yeah, definitely. Beth, yes, it's 4 cases per 120 mark question, or around 4. As we say, you can't be prescriptive. 3 really good cases would still potentially, you sort of go up there, and I know some students have been told to sort of add more in depending what's relevant. So yeah, I wouldn't sort of worry for that point there. Emily's asked if there's a scenario where there's more than one person, how do we structure it? Laura has gone through that before, haven't you, Laura? I suppose if you want to just recap in case you joined late.
Yeah, so what I would do then is I'd take each individual person and I'd apply your test separately to that person before moving on to the next. So if you've got one victim, and let's say it's murder, I'd apply the actus reus of murder, apply your causation, apply your mens rea, conclude on that person, and then move on to the second victim and do the exact same thing again. It's harder if you interleave it. So if you try and do like all of the actus reus of murder to all 3 people, normally what traditionally happens is students miss areas and don't go into as much detail as what they need. So it's about structure, work out your test for your defence or your reference that's there, and apply each of those stages to the first person conclude, second person conclude, third person conclude. And I always think, just to get past that point, what somebody raised earlier about losing marks on an application, the magical word of because. If you're applying a rule, add a because on the end and use your scenario facts to show how you know that's been satisfied, and how the examiner's then going to know that you know the law and you can pick it out and you can apply it as well. So my answer to that question would be tackle each person, go through the full test of each person, do a mini conclusion, second person, third, do the same again, third person, do the same again, and then give yourself an overall conclusion as well, as to what the guilt would be in that situation.
Yeah, brilliant. I agree with that one there. Charlotte, murder and insanity is come up together, hoping and praying. Yeah, again, possible. There's not lots being done on defences previous if you look at the other papers. So, that could happen. Are they guilty of murder? And then you have to maybe apply the law and insanity. There is a lot there, but you have got that. Or it might say that they are guilty of murder, and you go through whether they would get the defence of insanity at that point there. So, yeah, definitely. A lot of people hoping we could leak the paper. Not sure that's something that's possible.
Just to put in Robina there, I'd just point out on that question, on a murder question, if it's a murder and it's a mental illness or an abnormality, it's probably going to be diminished responsibility. Insanity might be more relevant to like a non-fatal or a property offence. Read your question carefully. OCR are quite good. They do tell you what's in the question. They will tell you what they're looking for. I don't know if you meant on the same side there, like Robina says, it could come up same side. But be very careful on a murder question. It's more likely going to be diminished responsibility. But read your question carefully, and then do what it says on that situation.
Yeah, it should definitely make it clear what it's wanting you sort of to pick up now, really. I think that's the key thing. They are a bit nicer, aren't they, compared to what they were before. Mal has asked, can we go over questions for self-defense if it's a scenario question? So somebody had asked about this a little bit higher up, Mal. So we have got the two main elements of self-defense, haven't we? Was the force necessary and was the force reasonable? So you've got your subjective element and you've got your objective element there. There's a lot of things relevant to the subjective test if it's in the question. So things like the preemptive strike, not having to sort of show reluctance. You've got your sort of, it needs to be a genuine belief. What if it was a mistake? So a lot of the key things in self-defense are relevant to that subjective element there. So I would only discuss those if you think they're relevant to the scenario. Then you've got your part two, which is looking at whether the force is reasonable, because as we know from Tony Martin, if it's excessive force, the defence is not going to work there as a result. So I would lay out that two-part test with the relevant sort of sub areas, I would guess, for the first part anyway, and then apply them separately underneath. So you've then got, right, this is part one. Yes, they thought force was needed because, was it a preemptive strike? Did they plan for the attack? Was it a genuine belief? And then that part two, whether that force was deemed reasonable or whether it was excessive. So it's two main things really, that you're looking at to be able to prove. Sorry, I'm just skipping through here. There's quite a lot. Yeah. A few students have been asking sort of about retrieval, not a specific student, Laura, but just in terms of remembering content. So any last minute sort of revision tips for the last couple of days based on that?
That's a really good question. I like the idea of blurting. So I would pick a topic area and I'd pen and paper and I would blurt out as much as I can remember on that topic area, and then I would go back to my notes and just see if I've missed anything. If I've missed something, pop it in another colour pen. Your brain will start to remember the things that you missed, and you're then writing in as well. That's a good way of remembering like your cases and your definitions. I do think practice exam papers at this point, annotating old scenarios and see if you can figure out what's in there, what you would write about it, writing your own answers to these, and then having a look at the mark schemes and having a go at marking them. And I think anything where you're using something where you're checking and testing yourself, so if you've made flashcards and testing yourself, or even if you're got a practice question and you're not using your notes, but then it's that bit about marking it yourself and then going back, and if you're missing something out, popping it in a different colour pen so you can see and retrieve that knowledge back as well.
Yeah, definitely. And don't forget, there's a lot of these live streams that were done last year as revision blasts on various areas, and they're still on the site. I'm sure Johnny will pop the link in to remind you. So there's a lot of those that you can go back through. You can get involved on the quizzes. If you just want in some short, snappy sort of 10-15 minutes on a topic, I think that can be sort of really useful there as a result for you. So definitely I would use that. I've just skipped down a little bit there. So Taylor's asked, for robbery, do we have to actually explain the elements of theft as they have to be present? So I think they're asking the first element of robbery obviously being theft. Does it need to be done in depth, or can it just be sort of a quick thing before you move to force? So I'll go with, let you take that, Laura, while I have a look for some more questions.
That's fab. Well, yeah, brilliant. So if it comes up as it's just a robbery question, then you would need to mention the fact that it needs to be a completed theft, but you wouldn't need to go through the elements of theft. So you would discuss the fact that there must be a completed theft as part of the robbery. You'd apply why there is or isn't a completed theft, and then you'd move on to your stages of robbery. So you then talk about the force or use of threat of force, the timing of the force, was the force used in order or before or in order to steal, and then your mens rea element. There's no requirement, unless it says in the question discuss theft and robbery, to go through theft first. You would need to discuss it in the brief aspect of there should be a completed theft as one of the elements of robbery, but do not go through the sections of theft unless the question does say theft and robbery. If it says just robbery, you want to just focus on, is it a completed theft or not? And then that's a your definition, and that would be your application too.
Brilliant. There's loads in here, and in fact, I really like that some of you even answering sort of questions to help each other. Mal, apologies, I did get to one from you. If there's anything else I've missed while scrolling, just obviously bob it on, and we will get to it in a second. Because I know you said that you've asked the same question quite a lot. I'm hoping I've covered it, but if not, please just pop it back in, and we'll get to it there. Wow, there's been loads. This is great, guys. Trying to think of something we haven't covered yet. So best way to structure an intoxication question, Ben has asked us. Laura, do you want to have a look while I can find some more?
Yeah, it depends on the intoxication. So if we go voluntary intoxication, you need to identify firstly what's your offence. Is it a specific intent crime, so one requires intention, or is it a basic intent crime, so one that has another element? So is it that it's got recklessness involved? If it's specific intent, we start off with the fact that specific intent can be a defence, a partial defence, as long as the defendant was so intoxicated they couldn't form the mens rea. So you want to be looking at why that was so intoxicated, so they drank 4 bottles of vodka, and why they couldn't form the mens rea, because they blacked out or they had no idea of what they were doing. Then we say that we go to our fallback position. So our fallback principle is that whilst they will get a partial defence for the specific intent crime, what the courts will do is they will downgrade it to the basic intent alternative. So we'll be looking for that. And then we'll be looking for the basic intent rules. So the basic intent rules are there is no defence for voluntary intoxication for basic intent, as the defendant was reckless in becoming intoxicated, and that's enough to satisfy the mens rea for the crime. So you want to be looking at there why that defendant was reckless. So why, really, it's the risk. If you take a sip of alcohol, there's a risk that you can become intoxicated, and that's why there's no defence. Everyone will be reckless if they've knowledgeably and voluntarily taken alcohol in that situation. If it's just a basic intent crime, so say we're looking at something where you've got intention and recklessness, so like section 47AH, an assault or a battery, then you wouldn't need to do that voluntary and specific intent because it's not relevant. It would only be a basic intent crime, so it'd be applying that recklessness rule as well. Don't forget, there is the rules that intoxicated intent is still intent in law. So if you can prove that your defendant, even though they were so intoxicated, they still could form that mens rea, then that would fail then as well. So I hope that helps.
Brilliant, thank you. I've just found one on an area nobody's asked yet, so I've just gone straight to this. So it's near the bottom, and it's from Ben. So thank you, Ben. He said, for automatism, what would be the best way to answer the scenario? So again, yeah, good area. It's not being questioned yet, Ben. So automatism, it could be on its own for a 20-mark scenario, or again, could be with some form of offence. I'd go back to the key 3 elements for automatism that Lord Denning gave us in Bratty. So we need that involuntary act, don't we? The cause has to be external rather than internal, because internal would be insanity, and that you're incapable of forming the intention. So again, I'd start with the content for your 8 marks, go through the 3 elements of automatism with the relevant cases that your teacher has taught you, and then that's how you would apply it to the person. So was there an involuntary act? You know, did that person have no control over their actions? Was the cause of that involuntary act something that was external for it to work? And then can you show from the scenario that they had no idea, what was going on? So I don't know, let's say the scenarios are maybe a non-fatal and they've been hit over the head with a hockey stick, they've been knocked out, and then it's when they've got up that they've committed this offence. Arguably, automatism could be something that would be used there as a result. But yeah, explain the 3 areas with your cases and then apply those areas as well. So I hope, again, that was useful for you. I'm just going to keep going down to see if there's any more there. Demian, how many points do we need to use for a top level evaluation question? Laura had mentioned this earlier, so you're looking sort of 4 well-developed points in order to get those top bands. So whether it be a 12-mark question or the 20-mark essay, they both have that key critique skill there, don't they, of evaluating. The essay question, you do tend to need to go both sides, whereas the 12-mark, just single question, as Laura said, it could just be advantages or disadvantages. So just be careful with that if it's a one-sided. But your essays tend to be sort of discuss the extent or discuss whether the statement's accurate. So you are able to sort of go both sides with that. But 4 developed points with your conclusion for that should definitely work there. Just seeing if there's any more.
There's been some fantastic questions today. Like, they've been really useful, really, really good.
No, I can't believe it. We're still going 45 minutes in. It's amazing. Dante, how do we answer an actress race question? I guess it depends what's in there, really. Somebody asked further up about emissions, whether emissions could be a 20-mark scenario. I mean, again, you've got enough categories for emissions. It's never been done, has it, Laura? So we can't say for definite,
No.
but I would argue there is enough content for a 20-mark scenario on emissions, because you've got all your duties, like your contractual, your public, your creation, your acceptance. But as somebody pointed out above, that could be relevant to something like a gross neg scenario. That might be where you drop that in. So yeah, with the actus reus, it depends. Sorry, it depends what really the sort of the length of the question is looking for. Is it actus reus in general, or is it something that's directed like causation or like some form of emissions question there? Diminished responsibility.
I think if you go with your policy of I think if you go with a policy of like it's 20 marks, you've got, regardless of the actress race question, if it's emissions or causation, you've got 8 marks for your no AO1. So you want to be talking about the rules that are there, especially if it's relevant to the scenario, because like Robina said, there's so many different emission duties and causation intervening acts. Those will be the things that they're looking for, the ones that are relevant for the scenario. And then it's just about applying it then for your 12 marks. So if it's an emissions one, what was the duty the person had? How did they fail that duty? If it's causation, apply factual and legal causation, and then apply your intervening act and decide if it breaks causation or not. But if you go with that 20-mark structure, you can have 8 marks for AO1. So you want to be writing the law and the cases that you know on it, relevant to the scenario, and then you want to be applying it then to the specific people.
Yeah.
Just interrupting you guys, we've got time for one more question. Do you want to just choose one more question for us?
Yeah, let's just have a look there, see if there's anything I can. So just at the very bottom, Tusky has asked, in an essay evaluation, should I include possible reforms? I mean, it isn't necessary unless the essay asks for it, but I know if you definitely have given some form of reform that's being suggested, that can be credited as an evaluated point, because obviously that is something that could potentially change about that area. So if you've got an idea of something that's being suggested, maybe by the Law Commission or anybody else, then definitely, because you can say why you think that would be a good reform, or maybe not so good reform for us to have on that area. So it's not required unless the essay actually asks for reform, but it would definitely be something that you could use as a critical point.
Or a well-developed point. You could use it to well-develop your point if there's an area of reform that would help that. It could be a good well-developed point on that one as well, to like add it instead of a counter-argument.
Yeah, brilliant.
Listen, I'm really, really sorry we have run out of time. I know there's been plenty of questions asked, and there's a few more still coming in, and I'm really sorry that we've run out of time. Wonderful questions, though. I think you'd agree with me, guys. Some fantastic questions, and
yeah,
I'm hoping.
Definitely.
Hoping everybody who's watching this would agree with me that the responses from Laura and Robina have been wonderful too. Brilliant stuff. We did have a little PowerPoint presentation ready for you with the bits and bobs on it. That will be available as soon as this live stream's finished if you want to download that. And of course, this is being recorded, so you can watch this video all over again if you want to go through some of those questions in your own time. But we have come to an end. We have got 2 more revision blasts for you, one for paper 2 and one for paper 3. I think they're on the 4th and 11th of June. So look out on the Tutor2 website to find out exactly when they are. If you found tonight useful, please give us a thumbs up in YouTube. That will help us get our message out there to as many people as possible. But on behalf of Robina, on behalf of Laura, and on behalf of everybody at Tutor2, all we'd like to do now is wish you the very best of luck for your exam this week. Good luck, everybody, and see you again soon.
Bye. See you later.